Hello everybody and welcome. This is Learn Hittite, and today I've got a little bit of a different style of video prepared because basically this is going to be very informal. A few weeks ago, some fine folks in the comments of one of my videos asked me if I could do a video debunking a spurious language macro family proposal, and that's exactly what we're going to do today. But it's not perhaps going to be as people expected it, because this language family proposal is very unusual indeed. That being said, today we're going to be looking at the Usko-Mediterranean languages, a proposal put forward by researcher Antonio Arnaith Vienna. I am absolutely sure that I'm pronouncing that wrong. I apologise if I got that wrong again, but yeah, I try my best. So this language family proposal has been championed by this researcher and a few of his colleagues. We're going to be looking today at his paper from 2001, but just to let everybody know, I've read a paper that he released in the year 2000, which is, I guess, a precursor to the 2001 paper. Basically, I believe that the major difference between the 2001 paper and the year 2000 paper is that the 2001 paper contains some genetic data. Now, you might be asking, why are we looking at a proposal that's like 20 years old now? Well, it is 20 years old, but the proposal is still being cited very often by this research team as they produce and publish new literature. So even though the researchers have perhaps toned down their support for the Usko-Mediterranean languages, as we'll see, they're still referencing these two articles. So yeah, I think it's valid to critique them today. And really, the researchers made some bizarre decisions when they were trying to collate all the data together to support the linguistic aspect of their language macrofamily proposal. Yeah, so for transparency, I'd just like to say, even though this 2001 article now, I haven't read it before, not in its entirety anyway. I have looked at the genetic data in there because I'm not a geneticist. In fact, I'm pretty useless with stuff like that. So I have got some of my colleagues, two of my colleagues who are doctors and professors in genetics and associated fields, just to look at the data and explain a few things to me. And I have my suspicion about how they're going to approach the language comparisons in this paper, because I've seen how they did it in the year before. And in order to clarify some data, I have called on a couple of my colleagues who are linguists in a specific area concerning a specific language family, and we're able then to verify some of the data that's going to be presented here. A little bit of background on the primary researcher involved. It's Professor Antonio Arnaith Vienna and his colleagues. His career, I've researched him, spans decades. He's an immunologist though, by trade, and he's studied under some of the most notable minds in immunology. He's founded and led immunology departments across Spain's leading hospitals. He's also worked in the UK, co-authored books on national transplant law. He's represented Spain internationally and published hundreds of scientific articles, mainly concerning immunology and genetics. He's also a really controversial figure in the community. There were some accusations in the past concerning some mismanagement of his academic departments. And he's known for peddling this really bizarre and outlandish and in some ways kind of like disrespectful, one of the most disrespectful linguistic theories that I've ever encountered. And disrespectful because it completely brushes aside, disregards more than 100 years of academia in a line or a sentence, as we will see as we check out this article. So yeah, That being said, for all the criticism that he comes in for, there is some merit in one specific aspect of his linguistic work, but only one aspect. So, yeah. But let me summarise this proposal for you. The Usko-Mediterranean hypothesis proposes that a group of people migrating out of the Sahara Desert area brought with them a language, and we can call it Proto-Usko-Mediterranean. This language family, these languages, would then spread right around the circumference of the Mediterranean. Many languages previously categorised as Indo-European or Semitic are in fact Usko-Mediterranean. And the authors of this proposal state that this language family from the Sahara, this civilization that was spread with this language family, is the root of European civilization as we know it, and not the Greeks. Conveniently, Basque language is one of the sole surviving members of this language family, alongside the Berber or Amazigh language family. And we can actually use Basque because it has been interfered with less, concerning, like, when you think about all of the Arabic loans into the Berber languages, Basque is considered more of a pure variety of Usko-Mediterranean, and we can use Basque to help us translate Usko-Mediterranean texts that we previously thought that we could not read, or that we thought that we could read and understand, but actually all along we've been misreading. So, for example, the entire corpus of Hittite. The story of Adam and Eve needs to be revisited with a new interpretation according to this theory. The Epic of Gilgamesh also needs to be retranslated because we've been reading it wrong after all these years. Yeah, that's basically all I've managed to gather from reading this year 2000 paper. So some pretty extreme statements or extreme proposals there. Let's get stuck in now to the 2001 paper by reading the abstract. See what interesting stuff we can find. The Usko-Mediterraneans peoples... Wait, what? Okay. The Usko-Mediterranean people are defined as ancient and present-day populations that have lived in the Mediterranean, Middle East, Caucasus area, and have spoken a Basque-related language. Present-day existing populations show a HLA genetic relatedness which is more or less close according to geographical distance. The Greek sample is an outlier, probably should be, in all genetic analysis, because Greeks have a significant genetic input from sub-Saharan Ethiopians and blacks. Okay, this is going to go down well. This probably occurred in pharaonic times. Present-day comparisons between genes and languages show a lack of correlation. Macedonian, Palestinians, Kurds, part of Berbers, Armenians and Turks belong to the old Mediterranean substratum, but they do not speak a language included in the old Mediterranean Dene Caucasian group. This is due to an elite imposed culture and language. Other ethnic groups speak an old Mediterranean language or Usko-Mediterranean. So if I remember correctly, the authors behind this proposal believe that Usko-Mediterranean is related or a part of Dene Caucasian. I have no idea how they work this out in their heads in terms of like migrations and things like that, because this is supposed to come from the Sahara, and of course Dene Caucasian is from Eurasia. Other ethnic groups speak an Old Mediterranean language or Usko-Mediterranean language modified by Roman Latin, i.e. Spanish, Italians, or by other not fully explained processes, Jews. What? I'm just going to keep on reading, I think. Therefore, the correlation between genes and languages may exist, at a macro geographical level, but not when more precise micro geographical studies are done, as shown in the present Usko-Mediterranean peoples model. Right, so there's like really a lot to take in there. Some of it just, it doesn't like, it's difficult to understand from like an English perspective, but I'm not going to criticize that too much. You know, I guess the first, it's always Basque, right? You know, whenever you read like some crazy language family proposal, Basque has to be in it. I don't know what it is. I mean, you know, Basque is perfectly interesting by itself as like a language isolate. You know, it doesn't need to be made any more interesting by constantly throwing it into every language family proposal. But yeah, poor Basque. It's always Basque. The Greek thing, is that some variety of like that Black Athena hypothesis that was published not too long ago in a book by an author I can't remember the name of? And this line about the Jews is just, I don't know what they're trying to say here. What are they trying to say here? Other ethnic groups speak an Old Mediterranean language or Usko-Mediterranean language, modified by Roman Latin. Okay, so saying that he's trying to imply that like Spanish and Italian, I don't know what that is. Maybe you can explain in the comments what the author's trying to put across here. So yeah, I honestly have no idea what that means. But this is going to be a blast, I can tell you. So when I read the year 2001, which is this one here, it really got on my nerves, because the fact that, you know, this kind of theory gets published isn't necessarily surprising for me, but what kind of irritates me is that there's very little content of scientific merit in this article. And if I remember correctly, it was published using public money, so it was funded by the Spanish government. And yeah, you know, there's so much research out there that isn't published because, you know, people can't afford the publishing fees and stuff like that, that it's quite disappointing that this sort of stuff makes it out there. But, you know, like I said, there's loads of crazy language theories have been published out there. Just go and check the comment section on my video on Illyrian and Thracian and you'll learn all about those crazy theories. The fact that these two articles made it through peer review just absolutely shocks me. You know, and especially when we just read this abstract, which is really difficult to understand. Yeah, I mean, my wife had an article rejected for publication a few months ago because one value was referenced in a table but was referenced or was formatted differently in the figure and the graph connected to the table, and you know, minor stuff like that, but still it should be corrected. And this second article is published by a good journal, so, you know, at least my colleagues would give themselves a big pat on the back if they got published in a journal like this. So anyway, enough chat. So here on screen, actually, we have the Usko-Mediterranean languages. Berber is there, Basque, obviously, Iberian, Tartessian, Punic, Etruscan, Minoan, Egyptian, Ugaritic, Eblaic, Sumerian, Elamite, and of course Hittite. And of course, it's the Hittite that actually really got my attention here, and is one of the reasons why I investigated this a little bit deeper. So yeah, so here on the screen now we've got the Usko-Mediterranean languages, and as the caption says, the only ones which are not extinct are Basque and Berber. So let's find this. Here they've got just information about the methodology concerning both the genetic and linguistic component of the article. And where is it? Here we go. So I don't know how well you can see it. If it doesn't show well, I'll expand it. But basically the conclusion of the paper's genetic component is this, what we have on screen here. A neighbour joining tree with two main branches. One branch shows a clustering of Mediterranean populations, and the other a clustering of sub-Saharan populations and Greeks. These Mediterranean populations are implied to be predominantly Usko-Mediterranean speakers. The biggest surprise of the genetic data, according to the authors, and probably everyone else reading the paper, is the fact that Greeks don't appear to be closely related to other Mediterranean populations. Now, whatever the conclusion of the genetic component, it is secondary for us, because we're interested in the language family proposal. And, as I think it was Edward Vida said, only language data can demonstrate language relatedness. But nevertheless, I did do some research and checked whether other academics and researchers had reviewed the genetic work presented here. And I did dig up something interesting. Around the same time as this paper, there was another paper by the same team published, which ended up causing a bit of a stir. And eventually it was actually withdrawn. Now, I don't want to get into that paper in too much detail, but if you were to take a look at it, you'd notice that they present a similar methodology, almost identical population groups, and a very similar dendrogram in their results. Now, this paper was heavily criticised in a correspondence published by Nature. The authors of the correspondence identified many issues with the article, including the small number of genetic markers analysed, the strange position of the Greek population, and the countersensical result of clustering the Japanese so close to West and South African populations, which obviously goes against both known history and geography of these two groups. So yeah, long story short, this correspondence was quite damning. However, I also asked for the input from some of my colleagues who work in genetics and immunology, and they were a little bit more favourable. Their takeaways were basically that, obviously the paper is over 20 years old now, and there are much better techniques and refined methodologies out there these days. But also they noted that if a greater number of populations were included, particularly East Asian, then the dendrogram would likely look much different. So make of that what you will. But the authors behind Usko-Mediterranean also give themselves a little get-out-of-jail-free card regarding the genetic component of their paper, by stating that at least for those more northern Mediterranean populations, the authors are actually unsure whether Usko-Mediterranean languages spread via population movements or language contact. Anyways, let's take a look at some of this linguistic data that the authors present us. So, what we've got on screen now is the bulk of the linguistic evidence for the Usko-Mediterranean languages. Now, I sanity checked the Basque translations using Trask's etymological dictionary, and they look okay. So I don't speak Basque, but I managed to find most of these in Trask's etymological dictionary. The authors are pretty loose with their citations about where they get where they're getting this data from, so it's difficult to follow up, but I'm reasonably sure the Basque forms are correct. Iberian Tartessian, I honestly didn't even realise that we could read it. Can we read it? Okay, so just a quick search on the internet states that Tartessian is unclassified. Let's check the paper. Okay, sorry, now I know what's going on. So, Iberian, Tartessian and Minoan in Linear A, the authors are suggesting that they have gained the ability to translate and interpret these texts, which is a complete surprise to me and I think many people in the linguistic community. The last article I read about Minoan was concerning whether in fact, or Linear A rather, was about whether in fact Linear A was representing one language or two languages. So yeah, this is quite revolutionary if they have translated these three languages here. Now, I have ordered the book where they present their transliterations and translations. Obviously, it's not going to come now, so we can revisit that book in the future if you're interested. But we're going to have to give them the benefit of the doubt that they have the ability of reading these three languages. Next up, we have Punic, Carthaginian, Hittite, Sumerian, Ablaic, Elamite, and Egyptian. So I have prepared for this a little bit by asking my two colleagues who work in Morocco and know a thing or two about Berber linguistics, Amazigh linguistics, and I asked them to check these forms which are presented here. And unsurprisingly, it's all bullshit. These words don't seem to exist in Berber. No, sorry, I tell a lie. There's two words. I'll let you guess which two. Right, let me bring up the... Yeah, I'll give you a clue. Here's one word which exists. Oh, sorry. Here's one word which exists in Berber, and another one of this list also exists. Everything else appears to be made up, and they don't even resemble like Berber forms. Now, when I was speaking to my colleagues, we made sure that we were not comparing them directly to Arabic loanwords and stuff like that. These words don't appear to be attested, don't look Berber at all. I also have no idea where they've got this data from, because as far as I can tell, there's no Berber dictionary, like handbook, proto-language reconstruction, whatever, listed, etymological dictionary listed in the references. So, and I would be really shocked anyway if these forms were so similar amongst all languages anyway. So we can give them the benefit of the doubt on the first three. Basque looks good. Berber isn't good. I don't know anything about Punic. I'm going to guess the data's trash as well. Hittite, I do know a little bit about. I don't recognise any of these forms here either. Anyway, what have we got for this? Well, mother and father, they have as Abba and Amma. In Hittite, father is rather Atta, and Anna for mother. But it's important to bear in mind that they're nursery terms, right? So, oh, and also the authors don't state whether they mean just Hittite proper here, or whether they're actually using the term Hittite to refer to all of the attested Anatolian languages. So that's confusing, but I don't recognise any of these terms in Luvian either. So, you know, let's just take it as being Hittite. Oh, and just one more thing. English here and Spanish here, they're obviously not part of the Usko-Mediterranean languages. But, you know, this proposal is so wild, some people might actually think that these are Usko-Mediterranean languages. And after I've finished recording this, I'll check some of these terms in Pervel's etymological dictionary to make sure that I didn't miss anything. What else do we have here? Well, I don't recognise this term here for nest or hollow. I don't really recognise anything else here. Door they've got as Atta, well, door or gate in Hittite is Aska. This initial B is interesting. I've never seen that before. What do we got here? Imma. Well, imma's an emphasizing adverb according to some, but it definitely doesn't mean channel, you know, or fire river. Ah, look what they've got here. Now, this is one of the first words and first signs that you'll ever learn to read when studying Hittite, because it is absolutely everywhere. This is a clause initial connective conjunction. And what that means is basically it appears at the beginning of many sentences, and usually it functions as the carrier of the clitic chain, which is something very typical for Hittite. It has a solid Indo-European reconstruction, and often you can see it simply translated as now, although its function is a little bit more complex than that. But yeah, basically it definitely doesn't mean where. And to be honest, the problem is with this data, it honestly looks like it's just been made up. I mean, in the paper, it's not properly referenced. The data is just, basically this, a list of made up words. There's no detail regarding the process that they went through to determine these forms. And normally with a language macro family proposal, you get something like for example, what we saw with Blevins's work on Proto-Indo-European Eoskarian. First, the authors will present like a table or whatever, going over sound correspondences. So something like, initial P in language A corresponds to initial B in language B or whatever, and you might get like the vowel O here equals a laryngeal here, or something like this. And then you'll get presented some vocabulary. Like I remember the one example from Blevins's work was odol, which I believe in Basque means blood. And Blevins stated that this corresponded with the Proto-Indo-European term here, meaning, if I remember correctly, like lengthen, extend, or run to. And basically what would happen is other linguists would just argue, saying there's too much meaning drift between the Basque word for blood and the reconstructed Indo-European form, and that's normally how it looks with these language family proposals. But here we can't even do that, because we don't have any kind of like sound correspondences. There's no grammatical morphology to analyze. What we have is just a list of words that seemingly appear from nowhere. And to be honest, with regard to Hittite and Berber, they don't even look compatible with the language that they're supposed to be found in. And honestly, this is just not how we do linguistics at all. And for those people who like to criticize proposals like Dene Caucasian, and perhaps in many ways fairly criticize such proposals, it absolutely doesn't compare to stuff like this. This is basically an immunologist cosplaying as a linguist. And actually that's unfair, because I think one of the authors behind this paper is an actual Basque linguist, so they should have known better really. And it's this sort of stuff that we can see here. If you go back to the paper that they released in the year 2000, it's this type of evidence that they present that is the basis of them suggesting to us that we need to revisit things like the Epic of Gilgamesh or even the story of Adam and Eve and interpret these texts in a way compatible with Usko-Mediterranean. Honestly, it's a joke. Oh, and if you're wondering why the vocab selection here seems a little bit odd, it's because the authors behind the Usko-Mediterranean proposal see that many of the texts that they analyse are actually religious texts in nature, whether they are or aren't, and they recognise the same kind of motifs like door, fire river, and some kind of mother goddess. So yeah, there's that, but there's no real evidence for this kind of interpretation. What I will do is I'll actually check the Sumerian data before I actually edit the video. I won't do it now because I don't have the reference material on hand, but I intend to use Mark Cohen's dictionary, Sumerian dictionary, and if I find out anything interesting, like, the data is actually good, then I'll let you know. So yeah, to recap, this Hittite data here doesn't look very good, neither does the Berber, but there's actually some additional linguistic data presented in this paper, and the authors have taken a short Hittite text and reinterpreted it for us. So I can't wait to see what insanity they've come up with here. Let's go and take a look. So we've got some Hittite. This is a famous sentence because this is Hrosner's the first sentence that he translated from Hittite. Let's read what they've got about it here. Also, the old Anatolian language is not Turkish, but Hittite. There were many languages in Anatolia over the years, not just Hittite, which belongs to the Usko-Mediterranean group. That is quite irritating because there's so much research into Hittite and the Anatolian languages. It's such an important part of Indo-European linguistics, you know, with laryngeal theory and stuff like that, that they just, you know, remove Hittite from the Indo-European family in one line. Hittite, which belongs to the Usko-Mediterranean group, therefore, many of the extinct languages classified as Indo-Europeans could be revised and could belong to the older Usko-Mediterranean family. Yeah. Well. Okay, so let's read the interpretation of this text as given by the authors of this paper. And they came up with the following. Where in the bog, not fire, the door, I, yes coming, from the mother belong I. Now that to me seems very convoluted and awkward, and I can actually tell you that this Hittite text means nothing of the sort. It has no connection to what has been presented here at all, and I can actually say that with confidence because this Hittite text is actually relatively easy to break down. It's one of the first sentences in Hittite that we could comfortably and, you know, most importantly with a wider consensus translate. However, unlike what the authors actually suggest in the paper, there were other segments of Hittite texts that have early and compelling translations. Basically, this wasn't actually the only piece of evidence placing Hittite as being a language related to Indo-European. Now, linguist Hrozne came to the conclusion that the meaning of this sentence is bread you will eat, but water you will drink. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, well, how did Hrozne manage to translate this? Well, he did it by breaking it down step by step and looking for helpful clues. The first was that he recognised this extremely common Sumerian, ninda, and it means bread. And knowing this, it gives us a pretty good starting point, as it has a widely known and confident meaning, and can give us some context for the rest of the sentence. Like maybe we can expect a verb with the meaning give, take, offer, or eat. Then Hrozne thought that maybe this form was a reflex of the Indo-European accusative singular ending. And having identified bread in the sentence, Hrozne likely noticed how this word here resembled the English word for water. And the term here has a stem resembling the Latin term aqua. Hrozne noticed what appeared to be repeated endings on these two words here, but most importantly that the stem on this word resembled the word to eat in his native language, Czech. And then, you know, that's more or less it. He had it. Bread you will eat, but water you will drink. These verbs here, for example, represent second person plural active. And so, yeah, if we were to consult, for example, Pervel's etymological dictionary, we can find numerous examples of these verb forms functioning exactly as we would expect them and having the meaning that we would expect them to have, and not actually the meanings that the authors tried to present here. It's also worth pointing out that the way the authors have segmented the text is dubious. Take the Sumerian I mentioned, ninda. As a Sumerian, it represents a notion or concept. It's a graphical device and does not represent a phonetic value. And as, for example, Theo van den Hout points out in his excellent book on Hittite, sometimes Sumerigrams are so highly common in usage that we actually don't know the underlying phonetic value of the Hittite word. So Hrozne's interpretation makes much more sense than the segmentation of the authors in this paper. In fact, the underlying Hittite word here is likely the following term. So, you know, I have no idea how the authors would explain that. Sumerigrams and Akkadigrams are a common occurrence in Hittite. You know, take the following, for example. Here we have the Hittite noun meaning master, And it could be written like this, it could be represented like this, or it could be written as either the following, where the capitals represent the Sumerian form and the italic capitals mark the Akkadian form. And again, I'd just like to point out this form. We've mentioned it before. This is a very common connective particle in Hittite, fulfilling a very specific role. And I mean, it's everywhere, always fronting the clause, and it's impossible to interpret this form as meaning where, like the authors do in this paper, even if we accept their, dubious segmentation. So basically, all in all, this is a very misguided effort by the authors. We know intimately how to translate this text, and it is absolutely ridiculous that in a peer-reviewed article, this interpretation of this text managed to get published. Come on. I think what they've done to collect this data is simply taken the Basque and just tried to find these forms in these languages. And I'm sure you can find, I'm sure you can find most of them, and just reinterpret them. But obviously that's not how we do linguistics, right? You can't, there's no reason to believe that Basque is some magic key to interpret Hittite, when, particularly not when this article was written in 2001. I mean, our understanding of Anatolian linguistics is that good that when we unearth something like the Kalashma text, how long was it before we got that first interpretation that I did the video on? 3 months from the tablet being published, that it had been found, and then some preliminary interpretation. Now, of course, there's still a lot of questions regarding that interpretation because it's a new Anatolian language that hasn't been attested before. But we have a pretty good idea of how to interpret it. And I forget the name of the scholar that presented the primary interpretation, but I know I've seen personal correspondence that, for example, Craig Melchett, thinks that the translation is more or less on point with the usual type of questions associated with it. But regarding, Hittite, Luvian, we are so sure of their position on the Anatolian branch of the Indo-European tree that it's, stupid to try and remove them. And of course, that's not forgetting that other languages in this list that they've presented here, like Egyptian, for example, which belongs to Semitic, and Berber, which belongs to Afro-Asiatic, one step above Semitic, these languages all already have really secure placings in language families. So just to rip them out and arbitrarily try and reinterpret them using Basque, I think is dumb as hell. But that's what they appear to be doing here. So there's one other piece of linguistic data that we should take a look at, and that is this table 2. So it says Iberian Guanche inscriptions from the Canary Islands. So these inscriptions that they're presented here are traditionally identified as Latino-Canarian. These are a variety of different inscriptions which can be found on the Canary Islands. And actually there's a few different categories of them, which I'll present on screen now. And Latino-Canarian is one of those categories, and it's a type of Latin cursive that's heavily modified, condensed, compressed, signs rotated and stuff like this. It's very difficult to read, but to be honest, when you start to look at some of the inscriptions, you can see where the authors are coming from. These inscriptions were first discovered in the 80s, and then there was a process of collating the inscriptions, and the authors like Werner Pichler, they produced a database, analysed all the inscriptions, and gave it a categorisation of being a variety of Latin, which was appropriate considering the historical record. And this categorisation was seemingly confirmed when they found at least one, although there could be more than one, bilingual inscriptions between Latino Canarian and Libico Berber. So that pretty much confirmed what it was in the eyes of these authors. Our authors here in this paper believe that actually these inscriptions are a variety of a northern Paleo-Hispanic script. And when I say inscription, that's probably a little bit too much. It's not like they weren't inscriptions done by professional scribes or anything like that. There were more scratchings, scratch marks in rocks, in stones. The traditional interpretation by linguists like Werner Pichler is that these were kind of like I was ear type of inscriptions, because normally when you read them as Latin, they seem to be typical like North African names. Now, our authors behind the Usko-Mediterranean hypothesis believe that it's a Paleo-Hispanic script and that these inscriptions all have a religious connection, and that probably these stones were grave markings presented in a funerary context anyway. Now, what I will say, to the credit of these authors, is that they appear to be, when I've checked some of their later articles, doing their own fieldwork and categorizing and collecting more samples of these inscriptions, which is great. And I do kind of see what they mean when they describe that maybe a Paleo-Hispanic interpretation is more appropriate. I feel that it might be worth further investigation, because there are a number of different varieties of scripts, and it's possible that we have just not identified another script or language being in use on the islands at the time. That's why I think that this part of their research isn't a disaster. It's not great, because I think the way that they're interpreting it is completely nonsensical. So yeah, that's pretty much all of the paper in terms of linguistic evidence. There's a lot of filler. I'd appreciate your input on the genetic data that they presented. This article is now 20 years old. So our methodologies regarding genetics are for sure better. However, both of these articles are still cited and referenced extensively by the authors in their recent work. Their recent work appears to be a little bit toned down, and they don't make reference to this language family. But yeah, even with the context of 20 years time spanned, it's still very disappointing. And I know I said it at the beginning that this article managed to get published, because it's very difficult to follow, even if you're bought into the idea. The linguistic data is just so lacking, beginning with this idea that you can use Basque to translate all these languages, and then finding those Basque-like words and then making arbitrary interpretations. It isn't how we do linguistics, and whether you're a lumper or a splitter, you would agree that, because at least when you have like Dene Caucasian, there is some attempt at being systematic, finding sound correspondences, identifying, there's no grammar here, there's no morphological comparisons between the supposed Usko-Mediterranean languages. So yeah, pretty intense, interesting nonetheless. If you have any more language theories like this, language family theories like this that you would like me to investigate, please put them in the comments. Let me know what you think about this type of video, a bit more casual, recorded very late at night on a very hot, humid evening, but it's a little bit better for me because the production process, believe it or not, in those other videos takes a very, very, very long time. And it's a little bit easier if I can just talk into the camera like I'm doing now. Like, subscribe, share to a friend, do all that kind of good stuff. As always, you've been fantastic. I've been Learn Hittite. Goodbye for now.